Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Ward. I'm a plant scientist, and I'm asking your help to fund a project to identify the genes that will allow me to develop perennial crops, as in wheat, rye, oats, rice, and corn that don't have to be planted every year. I believe perennial crops will revolutionize agriculture. Directly, they will be better for the environment and wildlife, require less chemicals to grow, and have higher yields. Indirectly, I believe perennial crops will impact everything from eliminating childhood malnutrition and allowing more girls to get an education in developing nations, to ending the need for crop subsidies and reducing the carbon footprint of developed nations. To identify perennialism genes, I propose to do the first subtraction experiment to compare the gene expression of a pair of plants, one a perennial and one an annual. Just as medical researchers use mice to study human disease, plant scientists use a plant called Arabidopsis to study problems in plants because it is a lot easier to work with Arabidopsis. Let me introduce you to a couple of these cool little guys. In this pink pot here, you can see is Arabidopsis lyrata. This is the perennial. And in this green pot here, you can see Arabidopsis thaliana. This is the annual. Notice that these two plants are almost identical. Since these two plants are so similar, I hypothesize that the genes expressed by these two plants are going to be nearly identical right up until the point that the annual dies. Therefore, if I determine all the genes that are expressed in the annual, and then all of the genes that are expressed in the perennial, and then eliminate all of the genes that are commonly expressed, I should be left with a small set of genes with a high probability of being able to transform an annual plant into a perennial. To do the subtraction, I'm trying to raise $15,000. This is a lean budget for this project. It covers just the cost of the materials. If we raise monies in addition to $15,000, I will try to do additional sequencing runs to improve the statistical analysis of the experiment, and also I will use the money to begin the mutational analysis and the next level of characterization of the genes. Wilmington College is providing the laboratory space and all of the equipment to do the research, and I'm providing everything else that I can. Obviously, a list of genes is not a great reward, but I do have a pretty good green thumb, and I thought I could grow plants for people to plant in their gardens this spring. I'm growing 3 different types. You can see my greenhouse is full of the pots with the seedlings that are just getting growing. I'm growing Canterbury bells, larkspurs, and lisianthus. All should have very nice, pretty flowers this summer. And also I'll be sending out coxcomb seeds depending on your level of sponsorship. Obviously, the subtraction is just a first step. I will have to confirm the differential expression results. And in the future, mutational analysis will be used to define what exactly the candidate genes do. Later, I will try to create perennial Arabidopsis thaliana plants. And perhaps in as little as 5 years, I will be able to translate the research to make a perennial wheat or rice. Just briefly, I want to take you out to the fields around the farm where I grew up. My point is not to criticize modern agricultural practices, but to point out places where I think there are opportunities for improvement that can be addressed with perennial crops. Contrary to first reactions, the goal of creating perennial crops is not to eliminate planting the seeds each year, but to produce a plant with a super big root system that's developed over multiple years, that is better at nutrient scavenging and can photosynthesize for a longer period of the year. This is my patch of miscanthus grass. It's a perennial grass that I planted 5 years ago after hearing a talk by Steve Long of the University of Illinois. Dr. Long was researching this grass as a potential biofuel crop. And in his talk, he talked about how stands of miscanthus had been harvested in Europe without a loss of yield for 30 years without ever having been fertilized, ever having been tilled, ever having any herbicides applied, or ever having any pesticides. This got me thinking, why aren't all of our crops like miscanthus? Eventually I came to the conclusion that miscanthus was different from our grain-producing crops because it was a perennial. And that a lot of the problems we're having with our annual crops, corn and soybeans and wheat and oats and rice, a lot of the problems of those stem directly from the fact that they're annuals. And this started me down the path of investigating what was known about perennializing crops, and what was known about the genetics, and who was working on it. And what I found out was that except for a few traditional breeding efforts, there was almost no work on developing, understanding the genetics of perennialism and developing perennial crops. And that's why I put together this project. Beyond the miscanthus grass and the fence is a typical American soybean field. This field was harvested in October, and it won't be planted again likely till May. During those 6 months, this field offers no cover to wildlife, no food to wildlife. There's nothing growing on this field that's capturing carbon dioxide and turning it into organic matter into the soils. There's nothing really protecting the soils. And you're certainly not photosynthesizing and creating products for human use or, again, to improve the soil. This is very different than a natural grassland. And as a matter of fact, in the U.S., the Christmas bird counts have determined that grassland species are in decline. Mice and birds and all things. And they're actually paying farmers to grow natural grass stands. My position, though, is why don't we make our crops more like natural grass stands? Most of the natural grasslands, the prairies in Ohio, are made up of perennial grasses. So again, we're back to this. Turning crops perennials should help to make our fields more like natural perennial grasslands. This has been a bit of a whirlwind tour trying to explain the project and why I think we should develop perennial crops. The written proposal offers a much more detailed and scientific explanation of what I'd like to do and why I'd like to develop perennial crops. If you have additional questions, feel free to contact me through my Facebook page or through warjim35@yahoo.com. I would really appreciate your support for the project. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.